let's go. Heidi Love in the house, dropping knowledge and facts, uncovering the truth, no need for acting lax. She ain't afraid to speak her mind, breaking through the lies, rising up with love, taking us to new highs. We're living in a world full of secrets and deceit, but Heidi's here to expose, bringing truth to the beast. She's got a message, spreading it far and wide, from addiction to hope. She's on the other side. Ooh, yeah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Rise with me, Heidi Love. And today I have with me Nathaniel Gillis, and he is also the founder of Necronetics. He is here to school us on some things. We've already been talking in the pre-show. It's pretty dang interesting. So, Nathaniel, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing very good. Thank you for having me on. It's always good to be on new shows and to meet new friends. So it's a pleasure. Thank you.
It's a pleasure for me to have you. And I know you've been in this a long time. You know a lot of things. You've got a broad aspect. And for, not just a cult, like you were saying, you have Christian background, you have cult background knowledge as far as that. You have all this great info. And I think you're right. Like we've got to get somewhere where we actually have some information to go forward. We've kind of been stuck. I mean,
Very, very much stock. And yeah, it's because we haven't, like I said earlier in the green room, we haven't rooted our research in phenomenology as a whole and compartmentalized the phenomenon where we have ufology here, demonology there, the occult research here, esotericism there. I think that if anything, the phenomenon is pushing us into questions that are finally here, and they're also worth asking. And that is, are we dealing with the singular intelligence that we have compartmentalized into different archetypes and incarnations? And if that is true, what does that mean for our species? And I myself and a couple others in the field have been researching that. And it's finally, like I said before, if it's not giving us the answers, it's at least telling us what the right questions are to ask.
oh, yeah, it just seems like everything is happening right now at a warp speed, literally, which we know, Trump has done warp speed in a different way before, but this seems, we got JFK files coming. It's going to have alien disclosure. Like, I don't know if
Mhm.
people know enough to understand that, but the X file and it's just attached to it. I mean, there's nothing else to say there. It's got to be attached with the secret NASA program. And I just don't think people are ready. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, again, I think that either the phenomenon or people in power have controlled the narrative. And the problem is this, if you can control the question asked, you have thereby control the answer. And I think that's what it is. They've kind of pushed us to the corner of the extraterrestrial, not realizing that a lot of these entities were met during seances
Hmm.
and occult rituals. And even the practitioners that encountered them had no answers for what
Right.
species these entities are. And yeah, we have to start there first. We don't get to ufology until we first go to phenomenology, specifically ritual magic. I say as well that that is not a one of, that is a common thematic element. The most common thread in all of phenomenology is that consciousness within us is being courted by another species. And oftentimes that is a species within the practitioner themselves.
Awesome. Yeah, I have to tell you, I am or I was, not am. I am developing
Mhm.
right in my journey, but I am a very normally pragmatic person. This is this and that is that. But here's the thing. Every time I start studying something, and it doesn't have to be one thing. Like right now, I'm super into JFK, RFK, that kind of thing, because the Mormons were involved. And that's the only reason why I studied it. I wasn't like a
Mhm.
big JFK conspiracy, like none of that. I was just like, yeah, they like killed him, whatever. Like, I mean,
We know
like,
that. Yeah, let's move
yeah,
on,
like,
right? Yeah.
okay. And I just always was like, it's clearly a setup. I mean, so I wasn't really into it. But then the more I did my research on the Mormon Mafia and Howard Hughes, which is what led me to it, I get into all this weird stuff. And ultimately, almost every time, I won't say every single time, almost every time when you look deep in a religion, deep in a government, deep in anything, it ends up at God, aliens, like theosophy type stuff. Like you just sit there and go, wait a
Right.
minute. What is happening? Like, because I'm not that woo woo, but now I am. But
Oh, yeah.
it changes you, right? I don't know
Yeah,
how else
it
you
has
explain.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, and some people call it the evolution of the soul. But I think again, it's almost it's maturing us as a species to prepare us for something, and I don't even know that disclosure is the correct word. You know, that's the only vehicle of meaning we have in operation. But to truly understand what the phenomenon is, I don't think we will ever understand it. I mean, I think we can point to archetypes and case studies for behavioral patterns, but I think that even at this point, I mean, for the longest time, I would do lectures to say that they're playing by different rules because they're playing a different game. Well, it's taken us this long of a time, thousands of years, to start looking at the rules,
It's
right?
funny
And
because they made that movie like Just Look Up, you know? And I'm
yeah,
like, yes, just look up. The billionaires study the stars. Yes.
yes, they know. And what's so fascinating about especially 2025 are some of the interviews of the whistleblowers coming forward. I mean, if we're to take them at their word, you have people like Jason Sands talking about the Ashtar command, which she was again alleging that our government was in contact with a species, the Ashtar command. And what's so fascinating again is that it's connected to the Ishtar cult, and again, deities of antiquity. And this gets back to this idea of, are we really dealing with aliens, or are we dealing with deities? And if they are deities, then that would kind of confirm why it is that we have practitioners of magic right now
Hmm.
that have
I
bled
do
through
believe
the
that.
sun.
Hmm.
Absolutely. They bled through the scientific method. Even scientists, they know that in order to get science from it, they have to perform certain rituals. And so that's where the conversation is. And I think that in order to move that forward, we have to be intellectually honest. Because in my model of the phenomenon, it's not demons or aliens, it's something beyond both that is using these archetypes as a mask to evade us. And so that's why, if anybody who's followed my research, it's almost like I've thrown all the titles out, right? Thrown them in the dumpster, started from square one. Only then can we start looking at the bloody footprints in the snow and saying, okay, forget what we're told they are. Matter of fact, forget what they've told us they are. What are
Hmm.
they doing? Because most often, my friend, we are often blinded by what we see. We're deafened by what we hear. The phenomenon has an ability to project an image, not just literally in our minds, but when we encounter entities, we think we're talking to something, and we're actually encountering something entirely different. So that's where I'm at with the research, and I think it's starting to push buttons in the
I
field.
think that the best example of this, and I move this book forward, is
Mhm.
Dr. John Dee. And people have lost their history. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
They told John Dee was a pious man. If you really deep dive John Dee, he was doing something for the greater good. He was punished
Mhm.
severely. He lost everything. It was pitiful. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't mean to demarcate his work, but like, let's be honest, it was a horrible death for him. And he watched all of his family members die except for like two, I think, and he had to
Mhm.
raise a bastard child and all this stuff, right? And not that that's such a bad thing, like probably it was a wonderful kid, but the way it
Mhm.
came about, right? And these things can lie to us. This is the point I'm making, right? Like
Yeah.
he thought he was talking to God's angels. And honestly, what we know, if you study like Kabbalah and the occult and Jewish mysticism further, like when I talked to Dr. Justin Sledge, he said the things that people often encounter are nearest in the dimension, which means they are lesser than, right? Like when we get
Mhm.
into the greater and lesser keys of Solomon, and people don't really, unless they have like a Muslim background or something, some reason to
Mhm.
know what that work is, right? They're like,
Mhm.
what the hell are you talking about? But it makes sense because they can
Yeah.
fool you. And so
Yes, it becomes exceedingly dangerous when entertaining some of these entities. You know, and what's fascinating to me is how it's never changed. I mean, the incarnations have changed, but the proto-intelligence behind them is always wanting altars, it's always wanting sacrifices, and specifically attracted to blood magic. This is another interconnectivity between the occult and ufology that people, right, they want to ignore that because it's inconvenient for their hypothesis.
it's
Now, if
creepy.
we
Yeah.
Oh, it gets very creepy. I mean,
Yeah.
I can go into some case studies myself, and Yeah, so getting back to this idea of entertaining these entities, it's almost like there's some sort of game. I mean, even when I was looking at some incubi literature, it's not that that entities were manifesting to women in the images of husbands. The woman had to see the image. And I'm talking hundreds of cases to where if the woman saw the entity, there was almost a permissive will established, and that was established by virtue of belief. Do you believe I am who I'm appearing to be? Yes. And then that archetype change, it evolves into an actual role that the entity plays. And so at a certain point, I'm like, okay, there has to be something more than just the entity, right? Using images from the mind. No, there's belief attached to it. There is obedience attached to it that forms some form, like it's an awful grammar, but it forms some kind of a covenant. And so
Mhm.
that's why I thought, okay, we've got to throw all of these titles out, because if in fact it's not Dear Aunt Edna we're conjuring, if in fact, I mean, let me go down this road for a fleeting moment. My dear friend Paul St. Clair is in the UK, and he's a great guy, but he's one of the leading cryptozoologists in the world, and he wrote a book series on it. It's phenomenal. But in one of his case studies, is talking about a family that's driving on in this road, and they said that they see this wolf man approach them, and that they're going 45 miles an hour, but the Wolfman is seemingly just walking. But the rate of his gait did not match the speed he was going. Furthermore, furthermore, if he was in fact a wolf, the environment he was in was unable to sustain him. Knowing, right? So what you see again is that the environment itself is alien to the entity that's manifesting. Now,
Mm.
if we, right, the gate's different, the speed of acceleration's different. There's an incongruence there. It's not working because it's almost like something is trying to blend into reality, wants to blend in, but there's an immeasurable amount there. You say, okay, you shouldn't even be doing this. You take that and you combine it with Tammy Stone. That's in cryptozoology. Tammy Stone was a case study that was in the Collins Elite research. She was abducted by an entity, but she saw a UFO hovering over her car. She gets out of the car. An entity is approaching her, but it's walking in a jerky manner. Same thing. Its gait is slow, but its pace is fast, right? It's not working. And so she started to realize, okay, if that is an alien, we've got a problem, because it's almost again as if something is trying to blend into our reality, but there is this, it's fuzzing in and out, I should say. And
It's
so
the
my
woman
point,
in the red dress, right? It's the woman in the red
absolutely.
dress. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so when you look at these case studies, and I can go on and on, but when you look at these case studies, there is a common thematic element, and that is that things that should make sense do not make sense.
Yep. Yep.
And so if we can't trust that the wolf man is the wolf man, and we can't trust that that alien is the actual alien, what are we truly dealing with?
Mm.
And again, this gets back to even some Jungian philosophy where it's like, all right, these are archetypes, but it's not the archetype we're actually dealing with. We're dealing with something beyond the archetype that is at times grooming consciousness and abiding by rules that we as a species are ignorant of.
Mhm. Yes, I think that people have a really easy time believing that you could have a guardian angel that knows everything about you and is benevolent and helps you, but they have a really hard time with understanding that if you go into Jewish mysticism, there's lots of demons all around you. So many, in fact, that you don't want to spend extra time in the bathroom.
Right.
And,
Blot out the sun.
yeah, and they know all about you. Like, yes, it appeared to be your brother that passed away
Right.
because they know everything about him and they know everything about you and they know about your bloodline because, like you
Mhm.
said, blood magic, right? Like it's
Mhm.
so important. And so are bloodlines. So,
It's just it's very strange, you know. I mean, that doesn't even cut it. We don't have vocabulary to articulate how weird this stuff is. But you're
mhm.
right, even in demonology, like Paul Eno was giving a lecture, it was at the Exeter conference. He was talking about his time in the seminary, and that he was in the middle of an exorcism. There was a woman that I guess his priest led him to, and he was just observing. And in his mind, he said, "This is baloney." And the
Mhm.
entity within that demoniac came to attention, made eye contact with him, called him by name in perfect Malay, right? Perfect Malay. It's a dead language. And made a reference to his father ending his own life and said, "Not only was I there, I made him pull the trigger."
Mm.
So, whatever we're dealing with, you can edit that out if you want. I mean, it's kind of
No,
really
no,
dark, but
I was saying oof because like
yeah,
literally they know everything.
they
Yeah.
do. And it's, yeah. So who are they? What are they? I don't think we truly know. I think, again, that we're looking at behavioral patterns that can hopefully unite evidences or evidence. But at this point, I think that, again, bleeding through all of the archetypes and hopefully sifting through these case studies, we see that there are rules that they play by. And yet, even in my own research and encountering some of these beings, it's almost like as soon as you think there are rules, the phenomenon transcends them, right?
Yes. Yeah, is AWAS, right? With Crowley, because
Yeah.
okay, so every religion is based upon, something came, but there was a transaction. Like, I mean, I can do
Mm,
this all day long, and it's never benevolent. It's not a benevolent transaction. Like, we get into polygamy, we get into wife
mhm.
swapping, we get into, the
Right,
Parsons workings, Babylon workings. We get into these things that don't compute, like you said. It doesn't fit with the walk, right? Like, I'm an
right.
angel, have sex with his wife. Like, that doesn't work. No, that I don't think that's
No,
benevolent. Yeah. And so we get into all these things, but even Crowley, he everybody says, okay, he's so wicked. But here's the thing about him. He was a truth teller. Whether he
mhm,
chose that path or not, he told the truth. And actually he got pissed later. And the reason why everyone goes to Lamb is because
mhm.
AWAS, he got mad and said, he lied to me. He lied to me. I wish I never wrote the book of the law.
Mm. There you go.
Wow.
This, and I think people underestimate the power some of these beings have. I mean, and again, my primary work has been centered around incubi. And so, even in these case studies, you see that in these interactions, there is an overwhelming amount of control that beings have over our emotions. And so it's almost, and we've seen this even in ufology, where it's almost like it's not just in front of you, it's within you. And where it's manifesting to you, but it's using you to manifest an image that it wears.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
in that contract, it's so difficult because it's almost like a symbiotic relationship. It's parasitism as well, where I want to believe you are, right? Like there was one case where a woman thought it was her deceased husband. I want to believe you are my deceased husband. And so the phenomenon will incarnate as something we want to believe in and then
Yes.
manifest through us and at the end influence our emotions to agree with it. And by the time we fully understand what we're doing, the archetype moves out of the way. And now you're making eye contact with the proto intelligence itself. And so when you're looking at all of the data, it's impossible not to conclude number one, that ritual magic is present. Number two, we don't know what they are. We only know the archetypes they've incarnated as. That is another interconnectivity that is all throughout incubi literature. And I've actually traced it to not maybe not two, maybe one even, a ritual of self-replication by practitioners. And that's why
Mm.
I 100% believe that what we're dealing with is some form of magician or sorcerer. And that's the
Mhm.
only vehicle of meaning I have at this time. But when Father Sinistorio of Amino was going into houses, he was peeling back the eyelids of incubi victims. The entity had carved its own sigils into their skin.
Uh-huh. And
So,
I've heard this with another story on the confessionals
yeah.
about somebody that branded themselves with a Baal tattoo. And I'm
Mhm.
like, and he even says, like, I wasn't really into all that, but I don't know why.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure that we are aware of the price, like understanding some of the needs or wants that these beings have. It really doesn't make any sense to us.
Mm.
I refer often to the Collins Elite Research as a faction within the Department of Defense that had discovered practitioners within our own government who were performing rituals in order to get technology. And so there was this exchange of value. and I'll perform this ritual for you, or I will build an altar for you. I'll give you this. And in response, the phenomenon would partially materialize meta materials. And so they're looking at this, you see this blinking in and out. And so they're trying to take pictures of it, trying to document it. And so what is that? What does that even mean? Why is it that all throughout history, from northern Syria to Chicago, Illinois, even here in Dayton,
Right.
Ohio, the phenomenon has always responded to certain things. And it gives us at least some insight into what they value, but not why.
Mm, that's
That's the
so wild.
scariest position, right? It's not just blood magic. I mean, getting back to this idea of species of necromancers in that are alive now, I think that's at least what some of these beings are. It's not that they're horns and hooves. It's that they've literally transcended all of these archetypes. This also gets back to something as well, where there is no real horned and hooved devil in the Bible. It's, in the book of Revelations, it's a beast, a dragon coming out of the ocean, out of the sea with horns. And yet we extrapolate that into some kind of demonic entity. And that's how the phenomenon manifests at times. And so there is this sort of partnership of manifestation that we have with it, to where as long as it can manifest as what we would expect it to be or believe it to be, it can be present with us but absent from. We are interfacing with an archetype, and most of the time, that's coming from us, right?
Right.
Here's the
Yes.
Rolodex of images. Which one do you want me to be? And again, that's another interconnectivity, not just in the occult, especially within, John D. and Edward Kelly's research, right? Well, I'm just a handmaiden. I'm an angel. I'm an angel. I'm an angel. Till I want you to go swap wives. And then once you
Hmm.
obey that, it completely changes. Now you see, again, I need every, I'm getting passionate and getting excited now. But
I
everybody
love
that's
it.
followed my
I love it.
research,
We should be. If
notice notice the switch of hands here, where they thought they're dealing with an arc. Oh yeah, it's this, and out of nowhere, the proto intelligence manifests, and whatever that is what we're dealing with. None, and I'm to the point now where, again, are they ghosts? We don't know.
right, right.
It's
It
possible they're none of any, and there's something else out there manipulating us.
And it's something that your brain has to be able to accept. I think you hit the nail on the head.
Mhm,
I always say Joseph Smith wasn't full of shit. I think he
mhm.
saw something, number one. Number two, I think he did the Abramelin ritual and did it wrong and screwed it all up. And there was problems with that. I don't think he did that right because he died
Mhm.
very shortly after certain things. I think he read the book The Mage. It probably wasn't called that back then, but whatever it
Mhm.
was called, right? And I think that these things know what our mind is capable of saying, that's okay. Like
Mhm.
Crowley, it could appear kind of as alien or scary because he didn't give a shit, man. He was cool with
Yeah.
whatever. He was just like, okay. But like these other people, I think it came as whatever they were comfortable. I mean, it's trying to manipulate you. You have to have your guard
Yes.
down. Yeah.
Yes. And that's another interconnectivity. It's through and through. It's not just the occult. It's even in possession cases, in incubi, succubi cases. It's in ufology. And again, if we're going to have a firm grasp on the questions to ask, we have to root our research in phenomenology. Only then can we take an objective view, look back, and say, all right, what is really going on here? And I think that's really done profound damage in our field. When we have ufologists that don't study demonology, demonologists that don't study ufology, they're in their little niche, right? And not
Hmm.
able to have a conversation of depth, something that is, that can materialize conclusions worthy of entertaining. But even to right now, getting back to some of the disclosure um, occurring now, it's they're starting to ask questions not about just deities, but about whether or not these symbols that are on these crafts, if they're actually sigils themselves. There's a difference. Again, a sigil being the pictorial signature of an entity. It's different when the entity itself is also carving the sigil. That right there transcends all of demonology and kind of pushes us into a conversation we've never had before. It's almost as if some of these beings were former practitioners themselves and evolved into something, or these are the beings that taught mankind ritual magic. That's what it really, in my mind, it's pointing to. And I think that as a demonologist, what they call me, but even in demonology, doesn't have the ability to encapsulate what they are. And it's not until you get through the research, through the literature, and actually encounter the phenomenon yourself, that's only then do you really understand, oh my God, like there's something much different going on here. And I would use the word alien, but not in terms of an extraterrestrial. Something other is out there, and it does appear to be manipulating us.
I like to call it something that the Mormons, and believe me, the Mormons show up in those alien files, and Watergate speaks often of why are the Mormons more involved in aliens than anyone else. And I
Yeah.
think he said the GD Mormons actually, but like it was a
Mhm.
frustrated, conversation, but they often speak of one thing. They often say in the end days, we will rule because we have the keys, the keys, the keys. And they also say they have the
Yeah.
true form of masonry. I think they have the true form of high magic. And I think
Oh,
they
yeah.
went underground with it because they saw Joseph got killed. I mean,
Yes, there is another form of magic present in the earth today. And people always accuse me of telling the same stories. It's because I don't make things up. You know what I mean? And so here's one of my stories. The case study one of my most fascinating case studies in my mind was a remote viewer who had it was go out of body and he'd have a cord the whole 9 yards. And he said that he would encounter beings that were his guides. That's the archetype. And he said that they looked like his guides, they acted like his guides. They would give him insights into lives of others in his community, celebrities, sports stars. He would come back into his body, hey, listen, if you're a celebrity, look, don't sign that contract. If you're a politician, right, don't believe your polls. You need to focus more in this area. So he was getting paid thousands of dollars to do that. And then in the middle of one of the sessions, he was transported out of body into a metallic room. And he said that these beings flanked him on the right and left sides. He thought they were his guides. And then when he realized that either he had been manipulated all the whole time, the last few years, or something had intercepted him. And so it was one of the two. And so, anyways, he's talking to these beings, and out of nowhere, he realizes, "Oh my God, you're not my guides at all." And so he's analyzing the situation. To his utter astonishment, they shapeshifted into something he'd never seen before. He slams back into his body, and religious amulets went through his skin from underneath subdermal scarifications to the surface.
mm,
They had literally carved their sigils into, no, no, into his body.
mm,
So we don't have room for that right now in the field.
right.
There's no way to even quantify that. We can't
Mhm.
explain that. And yet we have that one case study kind of encapsulates demonology and ufology because we have UFO abductions that are taking place in the very same kind of environment in a metallic room with beings. So my point here is that all of our magic is being transcended by another species that's present with us in this reality. And it's quite possible, and I think this is what it's leading to, is that our government is not only in contact with them, but some of the technology they're operating, our government, is inspired by sigil magic.
Yes,
Not
a hundred,
ours,
a hundred
whatever they
percent.
are.
100.
Yes.
Well, in the rotunda at the Capitol, there's that
Hmm.
picture of all the angels, quote, and George Washington, like up there with them, getting his place in heaven or whatever.
Hmm.
And they say it's like the angelic acceptance of George Washington, some stuff like that. And I'm like, wait a minute. And where the Mormons call their God Elohim, I'm like, wait a
Hmm.
minute. Elohim is a title. It's not, it's a multifunctional situation. It means,
Right.
extra dimensional, basically. It doesn't
Hmm.
mean necessarily a God, right? And so
Hmm.
when they're saying, oh, our God's name is Elohim and all this stuff, I'm like, wait a minute. You don't even know what you're talking to. You
Hmm.
probably don't even know anything, and let alone
Right.
government. And so I just feel like, okay, when we look at all of this and the leaders, and also when the president becomes the president and they do that whole ceremony where they
Hmm.
say that, he comes out inhabited basically by whatever, I don't know
Hmm.
what, it makes you really question. But people really can't handle the thought of like, oh, maybe the president's possessed, right? Like,
Hmm.
I mean, that seems
That's a
ridiculous.
deep
They'll
one.
laugh. Yeah, they'll laugh at
Mhm.
you.
You're right. I think that if people were more aware of the powers that be, they would be a lot more cautious trying to encounter them.
Mm.
Even getting back to Richard Banderick, he's an aerospace CEO right now, but he did a podcast the other day where he's talking about how 40 years ago our government was not in contact with the phenomenon, but they were receiving these, again, metamaterials from the intelligence, and they would actually go out in fields and collect them. And he said that they were self-assembling. We would hold them in our hands, but if the phenomenon did not agree with the individual, if there was some kind of mismatch in consciousness or abilities, it would dissolve into dust.
Hmm.
Might I suggest that the phenomenon is giving metamaterials to a specific practitioner that may still be alive?
Oh,
That
I agree 100%.
it's looking, and I think that our government's been doing that with Bledsoe, right? Hold this. Are you the one? Are you the one? And testing, this is what's so fascinating about all of this. Testing the metamaterial along with the body and the hand that's holding it. If both of them align, then they say, okay, yeah, now what we're talking about is something that transcends all the research, where quite literally the phenomenon is seeding our species with technology that is designed for one person.
Yeah. Yeah. It
What are
seems
we living
like,
in?
yeah, it seems definitely like there is a control arm, right? And there's
Yeah.
minions, like 100%. I mean, here's the thing. When you get to the most powerful people or the best inventions, and to your point, like 40 years ago, the
Mhm.
government was doing all of this stuff. Okay, you bring up people that have long been forgotten, like Andrei Puharovich, and the Nine. Like, what
Mhm.
the hell? I looked up just his invention list, like all
Mhm.
of his patents that he held when he died, or what. I
Mhm.
was blown away, blown
Right.
away. People have no clue how in depth this goes. And to speak of what we've been seeing this week and planes falling out of sky, a laser,
Mhm.
he had a patent for a laser that could drop things completely out of the sky just on boom,
Mhm.
like that. Eh.
Yeah, that's a scary conversation in itself because, and this is something I've been thinking about. It's like, all right, if I poo-poo a lot of the stuff, right? If I say, okay, they're dangerous, how much of technology do we have right now that came from
Yeah.
encountering these beings?
Let's do the
And
computer. Yeah.
right.
The
You know,
supercomputer.
at that point, that's an extremely inconvenient conversation to have because I guarantee you, do I want to give up the iPhone? Do I want to give up the laptop? Well, so at what point do I step back and say, okay, is there something else going on? And again, this gets into some other researchers where they talk about how the phenomenon is triggering an evolution within us. And I think that at a grand scale, that's possible. But we also, again, I can't stress it enough, how dangerous some of these beings can be and how manipulative the phenomenon is. One of my good friends is Dr. Barry Fitzgerald, and his research, he believes that when you encounter some of these beings, that you have maybe 30 seconds before the phenomenon begins not to just think around you or exist around you, but start to thinking for you.
Mm.
Right. And this is again, I'm so fascinated by the sociological implications between the entities manifesting and us seeing them, because there is again, it's I see this entity in front of me. Is it who I think it is? I've had cases where the girlfriends are visiting ex-boyfriends,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a counter, if you know what I mean, and the boyfriend gets up in the middle of the night, or the ex-boyfriend, she's gone, there's no evidence she was even there. And so there is this relationship between the entity and the image where it's using to project upon itself. In that way, it's almost self-seeing. I'm with you, but I'm not, right?
Mm.
And so in that relationship, there's a certain amount of time before the phenomenon can start thinking for you and start to confirm, yes, it is, right? Yes, it is me. Yes, it is me. And so in that moment, there is an overpowering. that takes
Mm.
place. And even some of the whistleblowers are coming forward and they're saying, well, you know what? I encountered this UFO and it made me feel all bubbly and loving. And it's like, yeah, but that's not a one of, right? We've known that about the
Yeah.
phenomenon. And so we have somewhere in the field, we have to get beyond feelings and beyond sight and start to really dive deep into these case studies. Because if not, we're going to have a group of ufologists who have no background in phenomenology, right? They're going
Mm-mm.
to want to tell us, yes, that ghost is dear Aunt Edna without even testing the spirit throughout history.
Mhm.
And so that's where I'm at. It's like, okay, these people are controlling the narrative. They don't want to have conversations. I mean, even even in orbology and understanding where they come from, even the egg. I mean, there was one possession case in the debug phenomenon where there was a woman possessed by her deceased or deceased husband. They asked him, "What do you look like if you were out of the body?" He said, "I look like an egg."
Hmm.
So my point here is if we're going to talk about orbs being UAP, then we've got to talk about Barry Taft's case study in the San Pedro haunting, where one of the orbs actively tried to hang Jeff Wheatcraft, but they don't
Mhm.
want to have that conversation, right? Because it doesn't fit the benevolent love and light narrative. And I've seen that too much to be hoodwinked because as soon as
Mhm.
we buy into that, the proto intelligence takes that mask off, and now we're in front of something we have literally no idea of. What are you? When are you? Where are you?
Mhm. Yep. And why are there so many warnings in the Bible about this, right?
Yeah,
Like, don't trust your feelings, don't trust your dreams. Be careful, you might be entertaining an angel, blah, 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 blah. All this
yeah,
stuff, it literally is kind of warning you. And then you've got
mhm.
religions that play into it, like Mormons doing baptisms for the dead. Is that an attachment forever of spirits onto these people? Like, we're doing,
There we go. You
yeah,
hit the
we're
nail on the head, my
doing
friend.
exactly. And then we're doing
We're,
endowment sessions for dead people for necromancy, again, attaching. But here's the scary thing. If you know about the symbols they put on their temples, and this is
mhm,
just my conclusion of all of my research that I've done. They have
mhm,
upside down pentagrams and pentacles on the temple. And one thing I know for sure is I think they're using this energy and the energy goes out, but they're sealing these things in because the upside down pentacle is more
mhm.
about or pentagram is more about this downward action. So I'm like, wait, this isn't benevolent. And when they're using mirrors, they're using,
Yeah.
all this stuff and altars and like you said, like there's a box and that's an altar and it's pretty. What's inside there? What's inside there?
Right.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
who are we doing this for? And that's why it's so important to understand the rules, if there are any. And not even just the rules, but the context behind the ritual matters. Just because we're doing what they say to do doesn't mean we really understand what we're doing. Why
Yes.
is it, right? The life is in the blood. Test this. All of this, we're being taught this again by our ancestors who we're to believe knew nothing.
No way.
You know,
No
yeah,
way.
absolutely. They knew a lot more. And I mean, anyways, I don't want to ramble, but yeah, that's where I'm at. And I think that if we if we're going to move the needle in phenomenology, we have to be intellectually honest. Some of these again with these orbs, I absolutely do not believe that's UAP. Unless UAP can actually be a portal for another entity to manifest, then that's a little bit more along the lines of the data set. But what we're seeing now in ufology are people building altars but want to call them aliens. They're doing blood magic, but they want to call them aliens. What they're trying, this is a phenomenon again, trying to incarnate as a new model, a new interface, but at the same time wanting to include all of the ancient rituals.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This
This
is
always
it's
goes back to Babylon. It always does. And
yeah.
I don't know why. Like, I'm just a lady that got out of Mormonism and I study on my own. I've never been like, talked to by really important people about this or anything. Like, I've just done this study and come to that conclusion, just me, a normal lady. So, what about the people like you, that you've been doing this your whole life, like studying hardcore, like into all this? Like, why is it so hard for other people to understand? And if you understand about a quote unquote aliens, why is it so hard to understand about, occult rituals or blood magic or magic?
Yeah.
You know?
Yes, and I think that there are researchers in the field that do appreciate that motif. There's a couple that I know of that are actually going to Joshua Tree and are performing the new Babylon working, which is interesting. And then there are others that, again, they want to control the narrative. They would like to come forward and say, you know what, there's no there there. All of this is just nonsense when it's not. I think that that is a good starting point. That's the way, it's I think the proper way to sit with the question okay, what are we really dealing with? But I think that in order to ask that question, they have to be too honest. And if they're going to say that, okay, they might not be aliens as we know them in extraterrestrial, they're going to have to acknowledge case studies that are very uncomfortable, that
Mm.
start to bleed into whether or not we have free will and if we are even avatars for someone or something else. That's where the conversation is heading, and you can't have that with people who are still stuck on
Mhm.
ET and hey, listen, it's Dear Aunt Edna. Matter of fact, I mean, even right now, actually, in last October, there was a conference in I think it was Germany, a parapsychological conference that was using necromancy to
Mhm.
contact the extraterrestrials. So we're looking at again, are all of these arrows are pointing to a singular source?
Yes, I think so. And like I mentioned about, the temple, there's only one reason why you would do necromancy when you start to learn about
Yeah.
necromancy and why you do it. It's to know knowledge of the future, right? It's to
Mhm.
have supreme knowledge and to
Yeah.
get power. Okay, so the prophet of the Mormon church is called the seer and revelator of the church. He's a living prophet receiving word each day. Okay, so
Mhm.
then you look into all these people doing these workings all the time, and they want you to do them all the time for dead people. They're
Mhm.
harnessing that for themselves. You cannot tell me that there is not a sect inside the ignorant. Okay, I'm not saying everyone that
Mhm.
doesn't know that, right? That is holding that majestic knowledge, right? Mystery schools type stuff. These
Mhm.
people are always like put in certain places. I mean, the prophet right now of the church is 100 years old, and he's a Skull and Bones member of the University of Utah. Like,
Mhm.
what? And that's the
Yeah.
only place that Yale has ever sanctioned a branch off clear back in the day. How come? How come?
Right, right.
Right.
Doing it in, yeah, yeah, yes, and manifesting as the love and light of something benevolent, but be behind the scenes doing some very sinister things. You know,
Yes.
I just think that again that we don't even understand their sigils right now. That is profound. People don't understand that. I mean, we don't even
Mhm.
know, even some of the ritual magic that has trickled down throughout history. We try to quantify what we've seen in case studies with that, right? Is there some comparison? Well, the implementation is the same, but whatever these beings are, they're carving sigils that may belong to another entirely different species above
Yep.
them, which opens up the floodgates to just some interesting conversations. But what I'm finding though is that there is a gap between scholarship and actual in-home investigations. And that's what I've been trying to do in my research is even as of late is, at first I started going out and, doing investigations, encountering these beings. Then I started to realize that, okay, some of these beings are playing by different rules or by no rules whatsoever. And so I would encounter the phenomenon and then go back to my library and say, okay, are these right? So what I'm trying to do now is I'm looking into the idea, and I think it is absolutely valid that what we're seeing in academia is okay, this is what they do, this is what they are, this is what they told us, but that's not matching what we're seeing in home investigations.
Mhm.
Some of it's
Yep.
the same, right? But the archetypes are changing. And I think that the newest archetype of the phenomenon is the extraterrestrial, and we can't prove it. We know it's like okay, even in demonology, we believed early on that they existed in uninhabitable places in the world, right? What's the most? It's the ocean and the sky.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's the same again. Areas, directions, geography is the same. It's just the archetypes are changing, and I think that the phenomenon is spearheading disclosure.
Yeah.
It wants
Yeah.
everything it's always had, but it wants to change the name so it doesn't have to be responsible for trying to hang people and trying to
Mhm.
kill people.
Well, because it's been this, permanent index or permindex, ha ha ha, of
Hmm.
people that they're trying to, extinct. And it's because why? Because they got to a certain level. And like you said, now people are doing this in their house that aren't related to
Yeah.
any situation. They can't get rid of everybody. It's getting too hard. So I feel like they
Yeah.
have to do something.
Yes. Yeah. Even I forget who it was. Even one of the Matthew Roberts, he was one of the witnesses to the Gimbal UAP. That's a UFO, allegedly, in a UAP. But then he went home and a voice began to talk to him, pointing him to certain esoteric authors in certain esoteric books. This is why, again, Diana Walsh Pasuka has come out and said, okay, these seem to be initiatory practices. I would suggest that the phenomenon is looking for a certain practitioner, and we don't know who he is or who she is. And I think that the government is trying to find them before the phenomenon does.
Do
Both
you
of them are.
do you think that's what 2020 was? Looking the DNA
It may
stuff?
be. It may very well be that. Looking, yeah. And even with Bledsoe and stuff, people are like, well, I think it was Ryan Bledsoe that said that they felt that my dad was Merlin. Well, okay, because Chris isn't Merlin. Who's Merlin?
Right. Right.
Right? Again, what we're looking at is, and this is something that I'm going to be bringing out more and more, but this is kind of a hint to the newest research I've been doing. Yes, it's not just that the metamaterials have to align with the hands it is in. But it's again, it's not just the individual, it's the species within them. And so the phenomenon will drop technology, but who will it work for? And so it's
Mm.
almost a race between us, our government, and the phenomenon to find that individual. Who is it
Mm.
made for? Right. And this gets back to the idea, okay, why are we trying to reverse engineer it? Because we're trying to stop it from happening. People say, okay, yeah, we're trying to advance the scientific method. Yeah, but the phenomenon stopping that in some ways, they'll give us
Mhm.
some things, but others, like with Richard Banderick, right, it shuts down entirely.
Yeah. Yep. I
That's
think
almost like we're living in an X-Files episode.
right. It's like they can't like let it be what it is because then it's going to go into opening a can of worms that they
Yeah.
can't really have everyone be in because what if people figure out all this and
Mm.
they go crazy, or what if they are special and they have this knowledge, like I'm sure they want control. It's really not about, yeah, any,
Yes.
I don't know.
And yeah, the yeah, it's modern incarnations, but these are ancient incantations, and it's only through that historical lens that we find ourselves with answers. A lot
Yes.
of this technology, we think, okay, it's modern. It's not. It's ancient,
Yep.
which again would point to the fact that the phenomenon is ancient. It's primeval. It's not something that just manifested in the 21st century, right? When Kenneth Arnold was out there flying. No, this is something that has been with our species. And I'll go a step further, that the phenomenon is displaying evolutionary characteristics, specifically within marine biology and parasitic mimicry. Okay,
Hmm.
there are literally entities. This is fascinating. There are life forms on this earth, specifically parasites, that will not only blend into reality, but they will shapen themselves in the image of the host they're pursuing. I would think that's a
Wow.
hybrid. I would think that's a
Yeah.
hybrid. And they call it a dupe. This gets back into incubi literature, right? Oh, that's my deceased husband. That's the dupe. And so the
Mm.
phenomenon does employ parasitism and what's called aggressive mimicry. Not just that it tries to blend into our reality, and I can go here for a case study as well, where we have specifically a UFO that manifested to our government. They're looking at it, and it's shaped like something modern, like we don't have, but it has rivets.
Hmm.
Again, it could not survive flight. This
Hmm.
gets back right to Tammy Stone. The gait doesn't match the speed, the shaking walking, right? All of that, all of it doesn't make sense. It's not meant to. It's trying to blend into our reality. But can I suggest, I'm going to kind of splinter into different fields of research,
You're
that it's
good.
not just ufology, it's also being witnessed in hauntology, because some of these
Mm.
parasitic life forms can also play dead. Is it
Ooh.
possible, right, that what we're dealing with is a parasitic life form that appears as apparitions too?
Oh. That's a good point. That's a
Yes.
really good point. Because
We
I
see
mean,
it splintering.
people are seeking it, right? And why did we have such an influx? And people say it was the war. At the end
Yeah.
of, the wars, we got these seances and all this information. Like it was just mystical city. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just flying out. And then all of a sudden it dies, right? Like
Yeah.
really in the 80s, it's gone. It's all about,
Mhm.
let's make more money and buy a I don't know what BMW. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it changed so fast with the whip of a stick. Like, why? It's weird.
Right. Same orbs, same altars, same rituals, same sigils, you
Hmm.
know. But now they're extraterrestrial. And is my problem is okay, if it wasn't Dear Edna, and that was the phenomenon just playing dead, and it wasn't even the guy that was the phenomenon playing that archetype, then why should I believe that it's extraterrestrial?
Right.
This is the necessity of phenomenology. We are literally using, specifically in UAP and ufology, we're using the wrong question to answer, right? To get
Hmm.
the right answer, it's not going to work.
No, and especially with, I think, and I hate to say it, but
Mm,
so much of the time, all of the religions are patriarchal. But at the
yeah,
very tip top, if you really dig, like at the very top of Mormonism, there's this weird little hint that they're actually all about the mother of God, like this
yeah,
mother wife figure, right? And
yeah,
I think that it all goes back to that kind of worship, but fool the people because then it never goes anywhere. It just stops, right?
yeah. Yeah, and we're hearing this again with Jason Sands coming out saying, they were in contact with the Ashtar command. Then you get to Chris Bledsoe with the Lady in White manifesting. And it's more than an archetype with this one because there was a bull present. The bull rushed him, went through him. You probably heard the story. And next thing you know, she said, there's been a transfer of power essentially, that the masculine
Mm.
is being abandoned. We're leaning into the feminine. What would you call the Queen of Heaven?
I mean, for
Ishtar.
yeah, yeah, when you
These
look
are
at it.
deities from
Hmm.
antiquity. And so, what we're looking literally in real time, we're watching the phenomenon control the narrative
Yes,
and
yes.
and point us in the direction of, okay, yeah, sure, they're modern, but they're not. And I refuse to
What
be
about the
lied to.
Queen of Heaven, right? What about the Queen of Heaven?
Right.
What
That's what
about
it's
the
saying. Yeah.
representation constantly with the Madonna and child? That's not Mary and
Right.
Jesus, you guys. That's not Jesus. I
Right.
don't believe. I don't believe so.
Well,
I think
it
it's,
even
goddess worship with
Yes,
Nimrod.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, and it does. And what does worship include? But I mean, even now, right now in the field, there are people that are trying to distance themselves from the word summon. Like they're going out there, they're performing a CE5, but they don't want to say they're summoning these beings. Why? They are, but they because it places them in the context of religiosity, and they don't want to be in that conversation. It's like, but you are.
It
You're
all
very much in that
ultimately goes
conversation.
back to that. Yeah, exactly. I,
Yeah.
I always say, well, why does even science, like, why does that
Yeah.
go back to the ancient goddesses, like Diana of Ephesus, like
Yeah.
with eggs, like you said, eggs that this guy thought he was an egg, and there's eggs all
Hmm.
over. Those aren't boobs, okay? There's no way
Right.
those are breasts. They don't look like breasts. They look like pods, is what they look
Hmm.
like. And
Yes.
so ultimately, people have such a hard time with that. But I'm like, yeah, but look at how many things about our world we don't understand. Why is that hard to understand? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it represents another depth of reality we're not prepared for. I
True.
mean, with our government and some of the information I've been given just from contacts, it has much less to do with aliens and much more to do with reality. That
Mm.
whatever this proto-intelligence is, it can incarnate as anything. In anyone. I've had conversations with people who it's not just deceased loved ones. Like I said, it's a girlfriend or it's an ex-boyfriend or it's a husband. I had one case study where specifically dealing with an incubus where this lady's in bed and an entity walks up to her. She thinks it's her husband, and the facial features, again, plucking the image of the husband out of her mind and using that as the archetype it wears. And they have an encounter, you know. And at the very end of the encounter, he gets off of the bed and he stares at her and she starts to realize again the characteristics that do not belong, right?
Mhm.
Tammy Stone, you don't have to skip. Why are you jerking when you walk? With the cryptozoologist, my friend Paul Sinclair, your gait doesn't match the rate of speed you're going. With
Yeah.
this specific case study, she starts noticing that there are characteristics that do not belong to her husband, like slight
Mm.
physical anomalies. Then she starts to realize, oh my God. At that point, the phenomenon begins to lift the power off of her. She's no longer being thought for. Now she said, it was almost like I was waking up from a dream. She realizes that's not my husband.
Oh
And
man.
then again, it was blocking her own memory. She said, I knew it wasn't my husband because my husband was right next to me sleeping.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Then it kind of dematerialized with a smoky apparition and flew out the room. So my point here is that throughout the all of the phenomenology, what we're seeing is an intelligence that can blend into reality until it gets what it wants. And then
Mm-hmm.
after that, it's over.
Hmm. And so much of the time you wonder, like, how much of this is controlling our universe? How much of this
There we
is,
go.
yeah, like inhabiting, like you said, like if you're willing, not like this lady, I mean, that's
Mhm,
an attack basically.
mhm,
But willing, you're channeling it, you're offering sacrifice to it, you're doing the Abramelin, you're doing
mhm,
whatever you're doing to bring it here. That's not
mhm,
the only thing to do, but I'm just giving an
mhm.
example. And so, okay, you do those things. What kind of recourse
Yeah.
happens? How much of the time do we see superstars die and come back and
Mhm.
everybody's like, that's not, I don't know about that. Like,
Yeah, it's so interesting, getting into this cloning concept because it's another interconnectivity between ufology and what I call necronetics, which is the self-replication of species. It's these synthetic self-replicating systems to where it's a whole nother conversation. But for those that aren't aware of my research, because I know it's a new audience, but my research has been centered around not just incubi cases, but a species of necromancers that are creating fetuses to inhabit. I think
mhm.
that that's where the missing fetus syndrome comes. All of that. It's
Do you
all in it.
think
But
do you think that has to do with the research? Do you think that they figured this out with the pickled punks? Because I do a whole show on this
mhm,
where they
yeah,
were maybe messing about and trying to figure out exactly how to
yeah.
like help that, Because they
It's
kept
very
them.
po Yeah, yeah. It's this again that it's possible that this archetype might be the final archetype.
Yeah.
Right? That there may be no more revelation. There may be no more images. It's not the deer and Adna anymore. It's not the angel. It's not the demon. This is the newest. This might be very well be the proto intelligence.
Mm,
I don't know.
yeah.
But what we're looking at again is as long as it bears the image of the primogenitor, the original intelligence, if it bears that image, it can create a new vessel for that proto intelligence to inhabit.
And at what point do they stop having that be a creation of God and like
Right.
real natural DNA? And people, I do a whole thing on this, and I know it sounds crazy, but people don't understand, like, and I call it the cabbage babies because people kind of know a little bit about that with the postcards and
Mhm.
different things. But you see these weird images in those postcards where they've got like a machine and it's a mason and he's got the lock and the lady's got the key and she's always in a red dress like the Scarlet Whore
Mhm.
of Babylon, right? Like always.
Mhm.
And there's these
Mhm.
babies coming out of a funnel, but the weirdest part is, and it's a machine and it's making babies, but there's an armadillo, to your point about animal species, right? In this machine, like basically like it has to go through the armadillo to make these babies. And I'm like, this
Mhm.
is weird. And that's a postcard from the 1800s.
Oh yeah. It is here, and I think that when the phenomenon manifests as archetypes from our unconscious and our subconscious, that to an extent we can only know the phenomenon to the limits we know ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like we're in a race for time. The phenomenon, even getting back to Richard Bendrick, he was talking about holding these metamaterials in his hand, and he said that they reflected the environment they were in. So you and I have laid eyes on the phenomenon. We just didn't know what it was. We didn't know it was present. And it kind of when I heard his interview, it kind of pointed me to the possibility that much of what we're living in is a simulation, and that what we're dealing with is some sort of artificial habitat, to where in order for the caretakers to walk in, they have to manifest as something we're familiar with. Doesn't mean that they play by any rules. It just means that they take that face upon themselves in order to interface with us. And what we've done thus far, my friend, is that when we see demons, I've seen this, and again, this is the gaping distance between people that are in academia and saying, I mean, nothing wrong with that, because I'm going to be an academic one day too. But the idea is that it's not just that we have to read these books; it's that we have to go out and do in-home investigations, right?
Mhm.
Boots on the ground research to see if these two ideas of the phenomenon are compatible. If they're not, which is what I found sometimes, then we have to understand why. And I'll tell you why. It's because the phenomenon is manifesting as an archetype. There's something behind it. And so what we're doing is we're applying rules to the mask it wears, right? And then we engage it, it leaves. And now you're left with like John D. Edward Kelly. So you're not
Mhm.
who you said you were. Absolutely not. There's something
Mhm.
else that you did for me. You don't know exactly what it was, only I do. But thank you for accommodating me.
Right. And then it always ends in tragedy, almost
Yeah,
always. Almost always. So
yeah.
sad. And then on top of it, you've got this natural I think there are some bloodlines that must be either sensitive to this and
Mhm.
or something, and like they know it and you know it, but you don't know why. Like you just meet
No.
somebody and you're like, yeah, not that person. I don't like that person. You know, like and
Mhm.
you don't have a reason, and not like you hate them, but you're just like, I don't like that energy, or you feel drained, right, from
Right.
being in certain crowds or whatever. And people call it NPCs, and I'm like, okay, but there's got to be more to it than that, right?
Yeah, the walking vessels. Yeah, the phenomenon
Yeah.
seeing through their eyes. And that is just it. Whatever we're dealing with, it's not just, and let me back up to this. This is why I starting to disagree with the demonic hypothesis, because even some of the horns and hooves literature is like, wait a minute. There are some aspects of that I can see, and that the phenomenon has manifested as, might I say. But whatever we're dealing with is smart enough to evolve according to our awareness of it,
Mm,
to where it's the reason. And here's what's troubling: if it is in fact inspiring our evolution, then it can also be 5 steps ahead of us,
mhm.
right? Evolve
Yeah.
this way. Don't evolve that way. Why? Because I'm over there. I'm not
Right.
over here. So that's where you get into this conversation of, even if we engage with them for the purpose of evolutionary advancement, do we really want that? Can we trust them with our species? First of all, we don't even know what they are.
No.
It's insane. Anyways, I don't want to. I'm getting on
To
my little
trust.
soapbox.
You're good.
No.
You're good. My shows go kind of long, so you're totally fine.
Well,
Um, unless you've got a heart out, and that's fine too. But I think it's fascinating, like you said, like why would we trust something we don't know or understand? Like that's
yeah,
wild.
you know, the data set suggests that not only can they think for us, but in Marzinski's work, where he talks about people that are being led by the phenomenon, where the knowledge that they're getting, and people get so excited, right? Oh, I'm so excited, I got this knowledge. It's like, yeah, but for what purpose? In Jerry Marzinski's work, he talks about cases where the knowledge people were getting, they're downloading, was so that the phenomenon can tell them which direction to go in the car. And then by the time they get to that location, they realize, okay, the phenomenon was in control of me and allowed me to think I was in control of it. And so there's this cat and mouse game. And getting back to,
Yeah.
to I gave a lecture in the Awakening almost a year ago in UK, and I talked about, again, parasitic mimicry, and I talked about the Iranian spider-tailed viper and how it evolved according to its prey. And so he realized, okay, he's out there in the middle of the sun. A lot of the other predators are kind of going hungry. They're not really good hunters. And so he realized, okay, I'm going to do something myself in order to get what I want, in order to, guess, predate. I'm going to have to become what my prey is hungry for.
Mm.
Right? And so it's like, okay, how am I going to eat this bird, specifically a bird? Okay, I'm going to appear as a spider. And so this is fascinating. In its evolution, at the very end of its tail, it had created the shape of a spider, which it lays out in the sun. It
Mm.
People need to understand what I'm saying. This is the difference between the archetype and the proto-intelligence. A difference
Mhm.
between the ghost, the god, the demon, and the alien. All archetypes connected to a singular proto-intelligence. And this is, I guess, the best allegory. But this snake will hide in the shadows. The only thing the bird will see is the spider. And what it
Mhm.
does is it applies spider rules to an intelligence that's hidden under the rock.
Mm.
And so by the time he engages, the bird engages the spider, again, singular intelligence, there is an exchange of information from the tip of the tail to the head of the snake. Boom. And
Mm.
so what Jerry Marzinski was stressing was that yes, that we were not conjuring them, they were conjuring us. And they were
Mm.
allowing us to believe we were in control of the situation. That's exactly where we are right now in the field.
Wow. Yeah,
I'm gonna
that's
go summon them. Well, who put the thought in your head?
right. Yeah. Like where did
Yeah.
that come from? Why do you want to do that? That seems,
Yes.
yeah, I get that. That's wild. And I mean, it's a biological real study that people can look at. That's a real
Absolutely.
animal, you know?
It'll freak
So
you out. It'll freak you out. Well, go look at them on YouTube,
that's so
and
wild.
it's wild. Yeah. So it evolved according to the awareness of its prey. This
Mm,
could very well, and this is my hypothesis, this is, I believe, why the phenomenon is doing what it's doing. It's went
mm,
through different archetypes. And we see that in the skull experiment too. We see it in other seances where, okay, who are you looking for? I'm going to be that person. Even John D, what do you want me to be? Oh, okay, I'll be this beautiful handmaiden. I'm an angel. And then by the time you sink your teeth into the spider, the proto-intelligence incarnates something else that was present. My God, we've even seen this with oh Lord, with the Conjuring House, right? With Ellen Lorraine Warren. They go in to do a seance to get rid of the spirits. That's the archetype. Something else came in. It is exceedingly dangerous, everyone, to even want to entertain these beings. And people are going to say, okay, you're kind of a hypocrite because I do this. I don't, I'm doing this for research purposes.
right.
So I can, anyways, I don't want to
You
ramble,
probably
but
have enough,
that's,
you probably have enough knowledge. You really have to have enough knowledge to protect yourself. And I
yep,
don't think the typical person knows enough. You know,
yep,
there's just too much. And they've hidden the philosophers and the different things that do talk about weird things like this. And so like there's, you know, you've got to do so much study first. I think that's critical for people.
yep,
That's why I say with these religions, whichever religion it is, it doesn't matter. I use Mormons because I was one. But when you're doing a strange thing and they say, okay, this is just what you do if you want to be go to the temple, or if you want to be Phi Beta Kappa, or if you want to be in
yep,
Skull and Bones and you're going to do a religious ceremony or a ceremony. It doesn't have to be religious, just a weird ceremony, okay? It usually has a purpose. And the one
yep.
thing I yeah, and it says that ceremonies are actually visible in the astral, or we wouldn't
Yeah.
even be prone to do them, right?
Yes. And so, yeah, and the lie comes in where you're doing A, B, and C for this reason. And meanwhile, it's for a completely different reason. And
Yes.
I'm convinced along with you, I agree that what we're doing has an effect in that next dimension. I think that
Mhm.
that's also why there is this soul to skin relationship. I had a mother that came to me years ago, sent me photographs of her arm and her little girl's arm. They had encountered a malevolent entity and on haunting. And she said, Nathaniel, you won't believe this. She said, but we didn't even see anything. We
Mm.
felt it. We felt a burning sensation that from underneath the skin to the surface, there were these scratches. So again, there are various interconnectivities that show us, or at least point, I'll be conservative, that point to this being a singular intelligence incarnating as various entities. And I
Mm.
think this is why we have necromancy being used to contact the ET. This is why Ouija boards, right, with George Hunt Williamson was designed. Okay, yeah, well, what if we can use this to contact extraterrestrials, right? All of this is pointing, and one guy said, well, what if that's just consciousness? It's not consciousness, right?
Right.
That's the electricity. That would be like me saying, okay, I dialed the customer service of Chase, and I got P and C, and somebody's saying, well, that was just electricity. What if that was electricity?
No.
No.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
called a certain group. Someone else showed up. So that leads me to believe, and this is also demonstrated in Ted Rice's case study, where the phenomenon will almost tailor its incarnation to the individual, lead them through a series of archetypes that will switch hands. His case
Mm.
study is fascinating. With his case study, rather, he's talking about how he is a psychic medium and he's helping people, and yet he's being abducted. And so he's like, well, I don't understand this. So he goes back to his guides, but the guides are non-existent. They're
Mm.
not there.
Wow.
The phenomenon switched archetypes, where now we have a superseding program that cancels out the other one. Now you'll be answering to the extraterrestrial, not the guide, right? So
Mm.
it's going through a series of archetypes leading us to a desired end with altars, blood, all of it. So
All of it.
anyway,
Yep.
yeah, it's
There's a
fascinating.
reason. There's a reason why these things exist. And I don't think that it's just by happenstance that,
No,
Babylonian magic still exists to this day. Let's be real. Yeah.
yeah, it's not an accident they're responding to it, right? I agree.
Hmm. Yep. Any last words on your work or anything that
Oh,
you delve into or want to say?
so, well, at this point in my research, I am convinced that the phenomenon is trying to give a practitioner metamaterial and technology. And I think that, again, I've said this earlier in the interview, but I think it's a race of time that our government's trying to find the same practitioner that the phenomenon is. If we can
Okay.
find them before the phenomenon does, then we can at least have a conversation of what's going on. Because some of the metamaterial dumps that we're getting, I do not believe they're just for us. It's
Right. Right.
trying to find somebody to incarnate through. But thank you for having me on. I know
Yes,
with
of
my
course.
ADHD, I
Oh, I love
tend to
it.
just
Like,
go everywhere. So
Uh, actually, it's fine. That I like conversations, not just like a lecture. So this was perfect, and I think that it
good,
went where it needed to go, and that's what I
good,
love. So, will you let people
awesome.
to know that don't know your work where to find
Yep.
you, and so they can see your stuff?
So I do have a YouTube channel, and I think that you can utilize that the best by going through my playlists of shows I've been on. You can, kind of go through them, the latest to oldest, and see the evolution of my hypothesis. I'm also on Instagram as, my name, Nathaniel Gillis. That's where I just share random posts about my research. But that's how to get to me and how to find me. But thank you for having me on. It's been stellar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and have a great
Unfiltered
day. I'll
rise,
see you
keeping
next
it
time.
real. Talking hidden truths, Christian values, medicine, addiction, conspiracy.